Hello. I guess I'm starting this channel as a continuation of my reflection. What I mean by that is I am recently out of federal prison. I was there because I was convicted of 3 out of 4 misdemeanor crimes. Regarding the January 6th insurrection. And I served a 6-month sentence there because of the FSA law, First Step Act. I only served about 5 months of that 6-month sentence, which I'm thankful for. But I'm also quite thankful for the sentence itself. And several reasons for that. One, just the sheer amount of time and reading and writing that I was allowed to do. Two, the personal evaluation, life evaluation that I was able to do. You know, it's not too often that you're just given a length of time without essentially any responsibilities. You're fed. You really don't have to make any decisions, major decisions. When to wake up, when to eat, what to wear, all those things are decided for you. And while many, if not most, the vast majority would try to make the time go by as quickly as possible and distract themselves as best they could with TV or cards or drugs and sex, I took it as an opportunity to sort of focus on the entirety of my being, be that physically, working out 90 minutes a day, intellectually by reading challenging books, spiritually by reading yet other books and working towards implementing those spiritual principles in my life at the prison, which is quite difficult at times. Emotionally, in our daily lives, in my daily life, busyness, distraction got to be the rule and not the exception. And when that is chronically the case, there becomes a whole lot of undealt with unworked through, unconsidered, latent emotional buildup. And I am definitely not in the camp of just being an oversharer. In fact, I'm always accused. Always accused of quite the opposite. But the truth is, even in my internal dialogue, I had pushed many of these issues to the back burner, and the truth of the matter is my emotional pain, 99% of it, 90% of it, that doesn't matter, the majority of it, if not all of it, comes down to my own actions, reactions. That's not to undermine or minimize what's happened to any individual, including myself. But we ultimately are responsible for our reaction, what we do with our experiences. There is no place for blame. And so I had gone through a fairly difficult time in my own life in recent years past, and I spent the majority of my time pretending like that didn't exist. But I'm out and enjoying life. I'm on house arrest. I have 4 months of that. I'm on the strictest form of home confinement, so I'm not allowed out. Go to the grocery store, go to religious services. I'm not even cleared to work. I could read you an email from my probation officer, but it goes something like this. I've recently got in contact with the court in D.C. about your request to be allowed out of the house in order to work. And at this time, I cannot authorize you, as your home confinement is the strictest version of home confinement that the federal government offers. Even though one of the conditions of your release was that you spend at least 30 hours working. If you wish to change the conditions of your release, you'll have to file a motion with the clerk in Washington, D.C. So, in the process of filing that motion, even though by the time the D.C. courts actually even act or rule on it, which will, from experience, not be in my favor anyway, my home confinement will have already run its course. I have one match remaining here, and then I we'll have to find some more. C.S. Lewis said, "A pipe gives a wise man time to think, and it gives a fool something to stick in his mouth." It's March 20th here in Indianapolis. So I've spent the last few days getting my seeds planted, my indoor seeds that will go out into the garden. Maybe if I continue with this practice of shooting videos and sharing time, I'll make one on the garden and the seeds I've started. There's a couple flats and trays over here. The tomatoes are coming up. The peppers are yet to come up. I also plan to cook a chili today. When I do that, I cook a very large pot, and it lasts for all of about a week, typically. Because invariably I give some away, and at least in my family, once word gets out that I've made some chili, I get visitors. For which I'm thankful. Having spent some years estranged from my family and different family members, I shouldn't say estranged. But as it goes, various trifles that come between. Not to mention time spent living far from home. When I was 17, I was sent to the Dominican Republic for boarding school. It's definitely a topic for another time. When I was 20, I spent a couple years in Alaska, commercial fishing. And in the late 2000s, 2010 and 2011, I lived in Costa Rica. All topics for another day. I don't know if you can hear or not, but there's some little chicks that we just got a couple days ago. I've got a nice coop that I built a few years back, but predators ended up taking our flock, which was traumatic for my wife. And so we're going to have another go at it. Of course, I'll be rebuilding the run. In my life prior to going to prison, I was in the habit of using all sorts of productivity tools and journals. Very helpful. But the problem I had with these productivity journals and tools and whatnot were that they were very good at helping me to stay on task, get done projects, get done jobs. But they did very little to help me choose which projects, tasks, or generally which direction I should be moving. And so one of my projects, I had several projects while I was in prison other than reading and writing, was to create a productivity tool. Put that in quotes because it's not really about the day-to-day productivity, even though there is a spot for that, but more about making sure that what we're doing, what I'm doing daily, is in line with my life goals, my life purpose. So it's interesting because you start down in a sort of a brainstorm free writing, like say day one, and a brainstorm type exercise, and all of this is designed to only take up minimal amount of time, 15 minutes, 20 minutes on the first day, which is sort of like the big day, but my dailies and my weeklies now take 10 minutes. But this first exercise is really has prompts in order for you to consider your values and the long-term, big picture direction that you'd like to see your life taking. It asks you to consider different aspects of your life, which I never really got in other productivity journals, such as relational, professional, financial, physical, spiritual. It sort of prompts you in each of these various areas of our life that make up the whole being And by the end of that first day, which is called the yearly projection, you are creating a goal, a 1-year goal that would help you move the bar on all of these various different aspects of your life. And so the tool starts out with like 6 or 7 pages, just sort of like instructions explaining how this is meant to work and what the various processes are. But then it also talks about how even productivity itself is not really the ultimate goal. Checking off job done, marking it off on the checklist, moving on to the next thing. It's not really the ultimate goal. Now, while productivity and getting things accomplished and taking care of business is obviously a good thing in and of itself, it still isn't the ultimate goal. And it can also be a trap. Because in life, even our best efforts on a particular task or goal can be sidelined. Take a passenger seat in the ebbs and flows that we find in our life. So on day 2, you take a look at your yearly goals and you do the quarterly projection. You take those yearly goals and then you break them down into constituent parts, and you set quarterly goals that will help you advance your yearly goals. And it goes on to the month, the week, and the day. But on the monthly goal, it has a special focus on the relational aspect. And study after study show that relational health is right up there in importance, and it carries over to the other ones. I think everyone would agree that is almost primary to some of the other things. We can all imagine the man or the woman that is extremely successful professionally but is miserable in life because their relationships are all in tatters. Relational reconciliation or development, usually a combination of both, is also probably the most difficult. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of humility. And from the month we move to the week. The week is where you really start getting down to the nitty-gritty, and every time you approach a weekly or a daily, you can refer back to your monthly or your weekly, whatever it is, so that you stay and remain focused on those things that you've spent time to consider and have made a priority in your life. There's also every month a financial section, and while I don't provide the detailed financial budgeting template or layout, there is a reminder there to make a monthly budget, or at least consider your monthly finances and have a mindfulness and awareness of where that is. That's something else that I have struggled with in the past. More of a free spirit in that regard, naturally. I'm not a worried person. I'm not an anxious person. And so, to a fault, a lot of times. And so that's an area that I have been particularly excited about sort of taking control of in my life post-prison. This Samuel Gaywith tobacco is a little moist. Commonwealth, full-strength mixture, manufactured in the heart of English Lakeland for 200 years. Commonwealth is one of Samuel Gaywith's oldest and best-known blends of Virginias and Latakia, offering a full-strength classic English smoke. I don't know, I imagine Tolkien when I smoke this blend. I did have the chance to reread that trilogy while in prison, and I also read Beren and Luthien. I will say my favorite Tolkien book is, it was actually, put together by his son. From notes and various writings, is The Children of Hurin. To my knowledge, it's the only tragedy that Tolkien wrote. But, wow. Big fan of the Silmarillion, The Fall of Gondolin. Of course, the trilogy is magnum opus. It's been a while since I've read The Hobbit. I wrote a lot of poetry in prison. That was quite helpful. Man, this is good. quite satisfying to just take a moment to sit, reflect, listen to the chickens, watch the tomatoes sprout. From Indianapolis. I spent my prison sentence, served my prison sentence in the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Chicago. It's not your typical prison. It's actually a skyscraper downtown, about 2 blocks from the Sears Tower, now known as the Willis Tower. It's a short-term and transfer and pretrial facility. So it's not like maybe what you might think with a yard and kind of a campus. We were on one floor in a building. We were let out a couple times a week to go up to the rooftop, caged in, fenced off all the way around. Played some volleyball up there, and then there was a gym in the basement that we were allowed to go to 1 or 2 times a week. That's where we played some prison basketball. I wrestled in high school and continue on the mats with jiu-jitsu these days, but I really got to enjoy basketball. The chickens enjoyed eating a couple worms yesterday. I have a vermicompost or a worm bin down in my basement for food scraps, and it creates the worm castings, which are great amendment to your soil and for gardening. And so I grabbed a few worms and came up and threw them in with the little, they're tiny chicks. They didn't really know what to do with the worms. They just looked at them and then looked like they didn't notice them. So I went back downstairs to continue planting seeds and working on various things. Next thing I know, after some time passes, I hear the chickens from all the way downstairs just cheeping away. So I run upstairs, and if you've ever had chickens, you'll know how this happens and that they frequently do this in a flock. I just had never seen it with chicks so small. How one chicken will get something in its mouth, usually too big for it to eat, so it just kind of dangles or hangs in its mouth. And it runs around avoiding the other chickens, and the whole flock basically is chasing this chicken, trying to figure out what it's got and trying to steal what it's got. And so that happened, and it was cute because eventually they had what was that movie way back when. Something in the Hound. There was two dogs that had the spaghetti moment where they. Well, that's what the chicks were doing with the worm, and they ended up ripping it apart and eating it. So now they're constantly looking around and scratching around in the cedar chips looking for more worms. But my worms have been dormant. I mean, not completely dormant, but throughout the winter they get less food, there's less, and especially with my being gone, less cooking and kitchen scraps, less garden scraps, no garden scraps. And so I've made them up a batch of worm food. They love oatmeal, so oatmeal, cornmeal, some ground up apples and eggshells. Anyway, that'll put them into reproduction mode, and they'll be laying cocoons and go into town. We had a cold snap. This morning it was still below freezing, and tonight it'll get down into the low 20s, but it'll warm back up here, and then get outside and sow some of my parsnips and carrots. I'm always excited for the carrot varieties, and especially parsnips. Personally, I love parsnips. And in fact, let's see, this book here, High Value Veggies, basically takes a scientific and economic approach for the money of growing and the cost at the store, what are the 10 most profitable or high value vegetables, and parsnips are at the top. So that's a double bonus. I like to grow a wide variety of things, and we only live on a quarter acre. I mean, we're in an urban environment. Wouldn't say downtown, but I mean, downtown you can see the buildings right here. Indianapolis has a very small downtown, but we are in Center Township. Live on a quarter acre, so there's not a lot of space, but with some square foot gardening techniques, a book I've read many years ago now, and the ability to dump off extra plants that I start to my parents' garden, which is much, much larger. I've always had a good variety, but this year I've taken a different approach, and instead of growing one of this, one of that, I grow squash for fun, loofahs. I don't know, you can grow loofahs. The ones that you scrub with are actually a type of gourd or squash. All different types of corns, ornamental corns. If you just look right over here, I know you can't, but it's decorated from harvests in years past. This year I'm going to stick to tomatoes, peppers. Of course, I got the hot peppers. This year I'm doing Carolina Reaper, as per usual, and a Trinidad chocolate scorpion, along with an apocalypse scorpion, some of the hottest peppers in the world. And I like to make various pepper salts. I have almost a lifetime supply as it stands, but I like to make a little bit more each year and give them as gifts and add to the collection. The tomatoes I have been enjoying more and more as I grow older. And various times I can go out and harvest a bucket of tomatoes, come in and make a big pot of sauce and give it away or freeze it or can it. And that tomato sauce will last me until the next season. I've got all different types of tomatoes. I love growing tomatoes at this point. I don't know if you heard about that new GMO tomato that they got by crossing a snapdragon, edible flower, but it's a very, very dark purple and it has antioxidants out the wazoo apparently. But I've got a few of those seeds coming. $20 for 10 seeds, as I understand it, which is more than even the Carolina Reapers, when they first came out, weren't that expensive. But I really don't know the direction that this channel might take. But I do have stories and experiences. It is nice to be out of prison, though. Quite an interesting experience. Of course, you know that prisons are notorious for being overcrowded. On our prison block, we had just over 100 people typically. And it was an open dorm style. The ratio that you're not supposed to go under is 13 inmates per toilet. We had 3 toilets, so we were closer to 35. 2 urinals. 4 sinks. We were living on top of each other. Pause. Apparently that's something that you've got to say so that people don't think you're questionable. Yeah, I'm not going to get too much into that whole issue. People have got their mind made up. They don't want to be confused with the facts. It's not my job or responsibility to change anybody's mind. But yes, I was in the Capitol building on January 6th. I was the only one at the MCC Chicago in prison there for misdemeanor crimes. My probation officer has never seen this sort of restriction put on someone with misdemeanor crimes. I mean, being in it, it's clear to me what this is all about. But like I said, I don't want to make this a political thing, or at least not on the first video. But there is a forecast of slight chance of presidential pardon. Solomon said, hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. And so I'm not really going to get my hopes up in that regard. That's not ultimately where my hope lies. I've also planted all sorts of basil. Big fan of basil. I have a lemon tree right here. I've got a pineapple and a papaya in the basement. I go outside in the warmer months. I actually had the lemon tree planted outside. Got lots of lemons last year. Then dig it up and bring it inside for the winter. I had a rosemary plant that I've had for many years at this point, and it didn't survive my absence. So I will have to start a new rosemary plant. Between rosemary and basil, those are probably my two favorite herbs. We have the eclipse coming up. April 8th, so what, only about 3 to 4 weeks away. We are right smack dab in the middle of the path of totality. Which is perfect because I can't go anywhere. That will be interesting. I've never seen a full solar eclipse. Last one was in 2017, I believe. And St. Louis or thereabouts was the path of totality. Of course, it goes across the planet, but I'm unfamiliar of its direct path at that point. I believe it passed through St. Louis or very near to it, as I had considered going, but work took precedence at that time. Speaking of work, I have started to consider what I might do being able to work from home. I'm the type of person that likes to travel and get out and work with my hands. I have owned and operated a drone company since 2017 that focuses and almost exclusively on telecommunications, cell towers. I climbed towers and installed equipment and maintained equipment for a little while. So many robocalls these days. So I have spent the last few years traveling the country, inspecting, creating 3D models for cell towers. That won't work in my present condition. And I'm also considering a change of career, you might call. I love the work, and it paid well enough. I ended up converting a van in order to be a work mobile, and have quite enjoyed that lifestyle, but it's getting increasingly more difficult with growing kids and a wife, kids from a previous marriage. I had mentioned how I was in a somewhat avoidant temperament at the beginning of the video. And spending your time on the road from West Coast to East Coast, working and living it up, was how I effected that avoidance. So it may be time to set down my roots. My father has a wood shop, and I've been working with wood almost my entire life. Did mention I like to work with my hands. I don't like to sit at a computer, especially. Though I can video edit and type and use ChatGPT. I like to work with leather. I like to work with plants. I have worked in the field of addiction counseling, and some years in addiction. I have owned and operated a gym, a CrossFit gym, and a jiu-jitsu school that closed down during the pandemic. I've quite enjoyed the paths, the turns, the meandering way that life has taken me. So, we will see where this next chapter might take. I appreciate you sitting, presumably sitting, and sharing this time with me. I suppose I will get to making that chili.